welcome to another Mother Fiction Writers podcast. I'm Stevie, and Stacy is still off because she's almost done with her book. It'll be published, I think, in a week, so that's exciting for her. And then hopefully she'll be back in July. But I am here with Cayley, and she is a fellow bookstagrammer. She is a published author, so I'm super excited to chat with her about all things indie, her book. And I'm going to let her kind of introduce her story and who she is.
Thanks, Stevie. I'm Cayley. I'm otherwise known as CA Fray. I have a book that I published in January called His Viking Captive. And I guess a little bit of background would be that I've always enjoyed writing. It's always been a super passion of mine. But, life kind of gets in the way. Right. Had to get a real job and got married and had some kids. And then I had always been writing in the background that as kind of a goal. I would have always want to publish a book at some point. Yeah. And then I had my third son and I was staying home, and then the pandemic hit. So of course everyone was like, if you're going to publish a book, yeah, like do it now, right? Like it was very like, you should make the most of this time.
Exactly.
So I did then go ahead and kind of finish off a book there, and then had it edited, and I just self-published it.
That's awesome. That's perfect. It really is. That the pandemic, as much of a stressor as it was, it really did open up so many floodgates for creative thinkers or even just online jobs, like people kind of transitioning into a new way of making money and working and stuff. So I love that. That's awesome. I started Bookstagram actually thanks to the pandemic. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was already kind of writing, but that was where I was like, you know what? I want to find a community. I want to find people.
Yeah. So, well, and that's what everyone was, detached from at the time. So, that's great. So when did you start it? Like, do you have a date?
My Bookstagram account, I started, I don't know, it's like somewhere in the teens in August. So it'll be coming up on 3 years in August.
Oh, awesome.
Already.
Oh, yeah. That's very cool.
It is. It's really cool. And it's such a great, social media can have a very negative effect on people and the way you think and what you believe and like stuff. But this community, and then the writing community too, it's so uplifting. It's such a great. Have you found the same? Like,
yes. Yeah, I agree. It's everyone's really encouraging. Like everyone's just like, hey, let's be friends. You like this book? I like this book. Even if you don't though, like even if you're like, no, I hated that book and someone else loved it. There's not a lot of like yucking someone else's yum. Like it's just like, okay, cool. Like you didn't prefer that day. Even I'm finding even recently with because I do a bit of a bookstagram and author, like you do as well, like slash between the two. But even then, I'm kind of like veering away from star ratings a little bit in my own post because I'm like, well, I enjoyed this. I would recommend this to someone.
That's more,
yeah, like it's very subjective. Yeah.
That's what I did. So when I first started my Bookstagram journey, I guess, I did a lot of reviews. I did a lot of reviews for people. Actually, that's kind of how Stacy and I were already kind of friends, but then I also reviewed a couple of her books, and I had a lot of people like hitting me up asking, hey, would you review? And I loved it. Plus I did the NetGalley thing, and that was all right. I didn't mind that. It was a little bit of a lot of pressure because you realize you have a whole list of books to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I haven't done NetGalley, but I feel like that would be the same, like a similar, like, oh, you have to read these and then you have to do a review.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, a free book for a review. And it was great. I loved it. And actually, I think I got a lot of my followers early on because of reviewing books. But once I really started opening up about because I always talked, even my first post talks about that I was a writer. But once I was like, I'm really here to finally publish, I was like, I can't see myself because it is so opinionated,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously we need these reviews. Authors need those reviews.
Yes.
But it's easier why not give them, just say what you liked about it. Maybe say a few things. Like I kind of ended up, if I do it now, I have a structure kind of how I do it. What I liked, what maybe I thought was a little off, if I found anything off. And then I talk about the characters, that kind of a thing, and if I would recommend it, which usually I do. So, because there's not, unless I'm DNFing it, I love the book. It was a great experience,
Yeah, you're still reading it, right? Like that's what I'm thinking. I also I know some people don't DNF and some people do. And I used to never ever DNF a book. And then I don't know, I think probably in COVID or something, I got to a point where I was like, life's too short. Like if I'm not enjoying this, and I've DNF'd very super popular books that I'm like, oh, it must be me. Like the writing is good.
Sometimes it's just you're not in the mindset too, because I've DNF'd a book and then I'll bring up, I feel like I've already thrown myself, for anyone who's listening, under the bus, but Crescent City. It's just, I don't know what it is. And everyone says to me, oh, it's so much world building. But I'm a world builder lover, so it's not that part. It's just something about it. I don't know what it is. I can't, because I'm loving Throne of Glass. I love Agatar. It's just something about that one. So I could technically say I've DNF'd it twice, but I really do want, it's one of those that I do want to finish, because I want to get to book 2. I know what comes in book 2 at the very end.
Don't say anything. I don't know. I'm trying to avoid all the spoilers. Every time I see something, I'm like, I know there's connections, and I scroll past.
Well, fast. Yeah. So I know very little, but I know of something. And so I do want to read it. I think book 2 sometimes even I love George R.R. Martin. Those are thick, dense books, and stuff. And sometimes it just takes a couple books, to get into it. So it could be that book 1 is just not for me, but book 2, I could be like, all invested.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give up.
I would agree. I think I know I felt the same. We had discussed this. I felt the same about Crescent City. I was at page 400 and thought okay. And I took 3 months off. Didn't really care to continue. And then for some reason, I don't even remember why, but I sat down and was like, okay, it's building more. And then the last 200 pages are crazy. Cause always, that's what I enjoy about Sarah J. Maas, is that the last 100 pages, you're just bananas.
It's a big storm.
It's a big reveal.
For her, I love her characters. That's the thing for me. She's so good at just writing. The same with George R.R. Martin. They're very good at taking a character, totally different characters, but taking a character and just, even when you think their arc is going to be this way, they can totally change it up. And then all the connections and stuff. Yeah. So I guess I'll jump into, we kind of went on.
Sorry. Chatty.
I'm going to go in on your book then, His Viking Captive.
Yes.
And so your characters are Ridley, which I absolutely love him. And is it Yrsa? Is that how you?
Yeah, that's how I pronounce it. I honestly looked up Viking women's names, and that one was a very strong name. And then I thought, I can't really pronounce it. But,
sometimes I do that too.
I just say Yrsa. Yep.
Okay, perfect. And they are both strong characters, which is part of their dynamic and stuff. So when did this kind of idea come to you for this book?
Yeah, so this was very specific. I had an idea that I wanted to publish. I actually was working on a contemporary romance at the time. And kind of, it was before I was open to feedback. So at that contemporary romance, at that time, I put a lot of work into this thing, and I had been writing it for a long time, a couple years, probably with little kids, you do it at nap time. And so then, the pandemic hit, and I was at a park with my kids. So I was looking into possibly querying with Harlequin or Source Books or wherever I could without an agent, because I didn't have an agent. And I thought, well, I know that there's open submissions to these publishers. But then I had heard that Harlequin did these Blitz contests, and they accept a whole bunch of submissions for a short period of time, 2 weeks or something like that. So for this one, it was called the Warriors Wanted Blitz.
Oh,
And they wanted it from like age, I don't know, 500 AD to up to the 1700s or something like that.
That's
So they gave
cool.
they gave parameters.
Yeah.
And so my main thing was like, initially, I immediately thought of Yrsa. Like as like a golden goddess, like if you've ever seen the show Vikings.
Yes, I love it.
Yes, I love the show Vikings. Anyway, Lagertha, I think that's how you say her name. Catherine Winnick, the actor. That's like obviously who I thought of initially.
Right.
And so kind of just immediately poured out this outline of this really badass female Viking. Right. And so then it kind of developed from there. Obviously, it needed a male main character. I was writing a romance, and so
and a plot.
And a plot, those things. So it was a very I had an outline for the characters first, and then kind of came up with the plot later. But it flowed really well. I was able to outline all that stuff really quickly. Yeah, and then there was a deadline, right? So I think I had like 2 or 3 weeks before they wanted the pages. So having that was really helpful. And I think you submitted, I can't even remember. I want to say like the first 5 pages or something. Yeah. And then since then, so then after that, I got a request for a partial. So then it takes however many weeks for them to review all the submissions. So then I just kept working on it. Right. And then I got a request for a partial. So that was like the first 3 chapters, and it's, had to do a synopsis and all this stuff that's quite hard to do a synopsis and a blurb. Like the shorter things are way harder.
They are.
So yeah, and then I just submitted that, and again, you don't hear from anyone for weeks, and even at that, the time frame of which they got back to me was still pretty reasonable. I want to say it was like 2 months or something.
Well, and you probably were already invested into this story.
Yeah.
So you're like, whether I hear back from them, correct, I'm going to keep going, kind of a thing.
So then I just kept going, and I just wrote the whole thing. And I thought, well, eventually they might either request it, like the whole thing, or not. And then they didn't. And so I got really great feedback. I needed to do more character development. But at that point, because they had given me a partial, they had seen a little bit more of the work. And so I thought, okay, well, these people know what they're talking about, so I should follow their advice.
Yeah.
So then I finished it, and then did a bunch of edits and got feedback, got beta readers. At that point, I had gotten over my fear of showing your work to anyone else.
It just takes like even simply like 1 or 2 times, and then you're feeling like, okay, rip the Band-Aid off. This isn't so bad.
Yeah. And it turns out I love getting critical feedback now. Like, I'm like, please tell me where I'm going wrong here. Like, throw in what you like. But like, if this doesn't make sense, eviscerate it.
I appreciate that too. That's something I talked about with Amanda, who was on last time. She has done that for me, and I've done that for her, like back and forth. There's something about you, like, because that there's something, like, you're happy with it. Yeah. You need to see, you can't really see on your own what's missing, So critical feedback is so important.
Yeah. So I got over that and was able to, and then I was kind of at the juncture of, do I query this around? In earnest, like try to get an agent, and by that time I had already joined Bookstagram and saw everyone's, trying to query and whatnot. And then my husband kind of sat me down and was like, well, do you want to query and have like your name? Like, what's your goal? Basically, he said, like, do you want to be a big author because of your name and just be recognized for that? Or do you want to like have this as more of a job, which is what I considered the self-publishing as more of, right? Like, you do all the work, you own all the content. Yeah, you do everything. But then you might make, like, if you do however many books a year, my thought was that you make a certain amount of income per year, hopefully, right? Because you could query for years and then just still not have anything. So then that helped me kind of make the decision of like, oh, okay, I won't even query this around. I'm just going to self-publish it and just go for it. Because then by that time I had an idea that, oh, this is actually going to be a series. It's not just going to be one book. And I liked the control aspect of it. So then, so put it out in January.
Not having just a strict because you can even query and then get picked up, and then they love your book, but they want the ending change. They want something changed. Or and then obviously then it's heavy with deadlines, and it's like obviously we have to put deadlines on ourselves too as like indie, but I feel like that's even stricter because you get editing like this many chapters, that so it does, there's a lot more to it. And I feel like sometimes when you look at that, it's great, and it's so great to be published traditionally, but it almost seems very overwhelming. And then the creativity, how much of it is truly yours, you know?
True.
I just wonder.
I agree. I would say I've heard same with like your titles, you don't get to pick a lot of the like covers, marketing. But at the same time, that would be helpful because initially when, like I don't know.
I would love help with creating, not really titles, but I would love help, even though I can be so indecisive with titles. How are you about that? Do you just have it in your head? Do you know?
Yeah, for this one, because I was writing primarily initially to publish a Harlequin, his Viking Captive was a very like Harlequin-y type title, like his Stolen Bride, his whatever Renaissance woman, whatever. So I had that, and then now the series is all going to kind of follow that style of title. So in the future, I might have a harder time with it. But this time, I was like the second book. I just did the title reveal yesterday, and his Saxon wife. I was like, oh, marriage of convenience. They're Saxons, perfect.
Right, that is perfect. And I absolutely love, like, obviously Vikings are huge. We all love Vikings too, but I love that you're taking the Saxons route with this. It only intrigues me even more because I have thought about that. So obviously I'm more of like a fantasy makeup world kind of things, but I kind of wanted to dabble in like the Saxons era, but make it fantasy, like with maybe some magic, kind of, because they believed in a lot of that stuff, you know? And so I do find
it's very
that
similar. Like I would say the world building would be very similar to fantasy, like in terms of like, you still need to know about like swords and pommels and armor and, you know, and then, you can add magic to it, which is just like sprinkling on the cupcake. Like it sounds so cool, like, but it's very similar.
Yeah. And even the way that they lived, when you look back in history and stuff like that, it was such an herbalistic way of living. So in our nowadays culture, we look at that like that's, I mean, it's coming back, I guess, but it's almost like that's not the normal. So it's almost not really witchcrafty or anything like that. But like my son with my tarot cards and like crystals, and like he's always like, "Oh, mom's doing her witchcraft," you know.
I love it. I love when you post about your tarot cards also. I wanted to talk to you about this because I also love tarot cards. And so me and my girlfriends, like sometimes we'll just like, anytime we're together, we'll like go for a walk in the forest and like read cards. And then like, so it's just fun. Like if, you know, there's new moon or a full moon, like I do think you're right in that like a lot of that's becoming, people are getting centered in that style again.
I always say it is spirituality. It's, you know, you're just finding, it's very calming. It's a way of just kind of taking, like stepping away and looking at things in a different perspective. You know, not that the card is specifically telling me what I need to do, what's happening, but you need to just like look into it. You're almost like intuitively, you know, kind of look into it. And how does it make you feel? And I love that because I think it's a good way to just kind of step out from the stresses of everything, you know?
I agree. Yeah. And it gives you like a prompt of what to think about. Cause that's like, my husband is like, okay, do you think that this is telling you what to do? I'm like, no, it's a generic prompt for like anyone, but everyone's life is different in the moment that they're reading it. So something that speaks to me in the one card might speak to someone else differently. And then but it might give you a perspective shift, right? For that day. Like, oh, I am struggling with this right now. I could think this way.
Right. It does. It definitely does. And like, okay, so do you use like a specific tarot deck? Do you have like one that you just love, or do you kind of collect different decks?
Well, I'm by nature, I'm a collector. Like I collect books and plants and like things like that. So I do have several decks. And I have a couple of oracle decks too, which are just like even creative writer prompts or something. But I do have one deck called the Sun and Moon Tarot deck, and I got it at like a rock and gem show, and I just really like it. It's a nice size too. Like sometimes they're really big, so I like traveling around with that one. It's definitely like my most worn deck.
That's good. I do feel like we have a connection to some of the decks, and there's a reason why you choose them. I know when I first kind of got into it and stuff, people were like, you can't just buy. You hear all these stories. You can't buy
you
your
have to
own
have it
deck.
gifted.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, that's not true. I don't believe that.
They're mass produced for a reason. Like I can buy it
like,
at a store.
Right. Otherwise, nobody would ever gift me one. Like, I don't know
who would gift you
people.
a tarot deck, right? Like, yeah, exactly. You have to be like in certain circles to have that as a gift.
Right, exactly. And so I just kind of bought mine. And that one that I do share, the magical mushrooms, I pre-ordered that one because I don't know I know mushrooms are kind of gross. They're fungus. They're kind of gross or whatever. But
they're like whimsical.
They are whimsical. They're very like, but again, we went on a tangent. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right. But I agree I think our world building is similar in that you need to like look up historical things and see how it's going to fit into your world and stuff like that. Because like you mentioned, George R.R. Martin is the perfect example. Like his is very like actually historical, set in a fantasy world.
Right. It is. No, he's amazing. His mind just, I would love to pick it apart.
Right. Be so chaotic.
Right. So do you, when it comes to future books in this series, are you going to stick with this town, this little settlement area? Is that your plan?
Yeah, so far. So for the first 3 books, it is going to be in the village of Hirestow. Again, like I made these names up and I don't really know how to pronounce them. Hirestow? Hirestow. I think that's what it is. But yes, so initially it's going to follow the 3 men. So Ridley, Branton, and Graham, because they're like the friend group. And so it'll kind of, the book 3 will be like the bigger conclusion. And then from there, I'm going to also do a prequel in terms of like, so the Earl, Lachlan in the beginning, I know you arc read for me, so I'm like saying names, but I'm going to go back and just start with where all the giant conflict happened between the 2 earldoms. And then there's also, I have a couple of other like offshoots from this idea, just because there's characters introduced now that I'm like, oh, well, what if they had their own story?
Right. You can take that somewhere.
So I don't know. I'm going to see. I think I will also have to keep in mind, because honestly, my ultimate goal is to have this as my day job all the time. I would love to be a full-time indie author. So I'm going to see where that goes monetarily once the series is produced, because I have heard just often podcasts and reading materials and even Bookstagram, it's kind of like until you have a series out, it's harder to market something that's part of 3, right? And then go from there, and then we'll see like if I'll stick with the medieval. I think I'm like, oh, contemporary romance would be cool too. But I don't know if that's where my talent lies either, and I kind of want to stick with the same brand. So even if it's not in this village, I think I would still for the next little while stick with this same time frame, and then maybe like another village, because now I've introduced another village. Like
because you could even like, so you're with like the Saxons right now, but you could even go more northern. You could jump over to Vikings, but still be in that kind of time period. So that's pretty cool, because even Vikings themselves, they obviously spread and went all over the place. So you definitely kind of spread out there. And you talked about contemporary. So one of my questions was, why historical romance? And also, which I think you kind of covered it a little bit, kind of like what you got you, but you might have a bigger story too. And would you ever want to, dabble in a different genre and stuff? So,
okay. So first question, I think why historical is just because of the prompt that I initially had. I had been working on a contemporary romance for a while, and then I did get feedback on it, and it wasn't what I was looking for. Like, it wasn't positive. Well, it was positive enough, but then I would have had to do quite a lot more work to it to fix the things, right? So at that point I thought, okay, well, there's still like some meat to that story. I think I could revisit it eventually anyway, but right now, then I had the prompt, and then I thought, okay, well, let's try this. And then I think I found my voice more with historical. I think that overwhelmingly my beta feedback.
Like your kind of a thing. Where you
and
felt really,
yeah.
I get that. I understand that.
Yeah. So my feedback was very much like, oh no, that you have a great historical voice. So I then thought, okay, well, and I enjoy writing in that time frame. I like everything a little bit grittier. I honestly read fantasy mostly. It's my favorite genre, and romantasy. And I just eventually maybe would go that way. I've written previously some YA fantasy stuff, like back in university, right when Twilight was big. Mine's not about vampires, but it definitely has that kind of YA mystical magical realm centered still in normal life vibe.
Gotcha.
So I don't know if I'd ever
urban fantasy kind of stuff.
Yeah. But then I think contemporary is really cool. And I mean, there's so many genres in indie is the thing too.
There is. Well, and even in traditional, I think they're learning that they have to broaden their gaps too, because a lot of it was just strictly adult fantasy, YA fantasy, adult contemporary. You know, they were very, even like I feel like paranormal was the only one there for a while that was like paranormal romance, like that was an actual genre. But now they're learning like, oh, fantasy, it's always had a little bit of romance, because even Lord of the Rings, there was romance and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So it is good. Obviously, how much romance is totally up to the author, but I love that they're starting to, that romantasy, now obviously it's fantasy romance. We've kind of just made up that romantasy.
I love that genre. Honestly, I just started reading ACOTAR last year, and I put it off because Bookstagram was so hyped about it. Like, I was just like, no, don't tell me what to do. Like,
right. I know, I get that too.
You know, like I was a little bit like, okay, but is it going to live up to my expectations? I hope it does. And then the first book is, you know, okay, it's like a prequel almost. And then the next ones I was blown away by. Like, I loved them. So now I'm working through Throne of Glass, and I'm really, same thing though. Like, the first book, I was like, okay, like I can tell this is one of her first novels.
Right. She was so young.
She was so young. I didn't know she was so young.
I know. It's wild. I know.
But I mean, it's still well done. Like, enough that I still wanted to read the next ones. And obviously now she's like an empire. So.
Right.
But then, like I do really enjoy that style where the romance is. And so I've read Fourth Wing. Have you read Fourth Wing?
So I'm currently reading it. I am chapter 14, I think. 15,
okay.
Around there. I'm doing audiobook because I am the type that I don't want to jump on trends, because I get a weird block in my head. I'll start being like you said, don't tell me what to do. And I'll start judging the book, you know, without meaning to. I just will. But so far, I am loving it, and I'm loving one thing. So I'm kind of buddy reading it for someone who's going to be on the podcast.
Oh, nice.
So we're going to talk about it. But one thing that I am enjoying about it, and I think I can see how people are loving it so much, is it is a very old school kind, not really old school, but like 2000s style. You're talking Twilight, you're talking
like
a lot of those old style, where it was like a predictable writing style, but it was it just draws you in, and you're like, I know where this is going. I have a feeling what's happening. And like, but you're like, oh, it's so good. And it's so just something's constantly happening. The characters are so very who they are. And I know there's a big thing in the end and stuff like that, but I am loving it. So don't give anything too much away.
I won't. No. I do think it just, I want to say like the romantasy aspect of it is good. I think same thing. Like, it's very hyped right now. It's very popular. And then, yeah, at the end, it's like, oh, okay, this is why it's all so
Yeah.
popular. So it all wraps up. But I think fantasy just has to do that as a genre. And like, there's so many little tidbits. And I would say that's
It's
where,
always a build. Like
yeah,
it's always like even like little things that you kind of forget about sometimes within all of a sudden come into play, and you're like,
yes,
oh my gosh, I didn't think like Holly Black. Holly Black, I feel
Holly
like
Black.
she doesn't get brought up enough about how good her endings are, because she is so good at like just making you like, what are the characters doing and all these different things that are going on. Very character specific writing. But then her plots just explode in the end. And
there's so much
like,
going on. Like, you turned me on to Cruel Prince, I would say. Like, I thought, oh, I'll give this a try. And I could not put it down. Like, it was so
amazing.
Exciting. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
And like you had said, I read it several times, but I could see how reading several times would put you in the perspective of like the family, the romance, the sister bond, the found family. Like,
well, in that first half, I always try, and I understand why people don't. Some people can't get over the how awful everybody is. Like the world of Fairy.
yeah.
Everyone's so awful to her and stuff. And then she is not the best either. And then even the sister is not so great. But when you kind of step away from the bully aspect and you look at like, why are they all like this and why? Because that's all they've ever known. So then to further into the story and find the connections and how Jude gets finds the connection. Obviously, Carden opens up even more, and you're like, oh my god, Carden, you're
Carden. It was so good. I just also loved her prose. It's beautiful, and it's also ruthless. Like, I said this to my sister, read it right after I read it, and I said, like, it's very exciting because there's something happening all the time. You're right. It's totally brutal, but then the way that she writes is beautiful. Just with one sentence, and it's not a hard sentence, but she'll have just like a one line where you're like, oh, lovely.
I know.
And ruthless.
So good. It is. She's so good. It's very dark. Like for a YA romance, it is a dark romance. You know, you're not talking like sexually dark romance. Like there's all that out there and stuff. It's just a very much like, this is the world. The world is dark. It's cruel. It's like you said, ruthless and stuff. And that's why even I feel like people don't talk about Matic enough, because him, I was like, you're
so great,
complex character.
Yeah.
Like, give me his backstory too, please. Like, it was so good.
Yeah, no, he's great. And I really liked the complicated, like, he killed my parents, but I love him. Like that, like, he's my dad. He raised me. And even towards, the end of it, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read it, but it's like, it is so complex, the way that they have to negotiate their relationship and the way they betray one another. It was just like beautifully written.
Yeah, it was. She did such a good job. And like I said, it's one of those, it's a writing style that, because everyone is kind of so even darker than morally gray, you know what I mean? Like, because everyone is so this way, you have to almost put it, she makes you put yourself in their thought process of like, this is why they are this way. This is why their relationships are not like, oh, I just love you and adore you. It's by you I am forever undone. Like, such a good line.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. But I would say, like, I would be interested to almost like, I would like to talk to an author while they're in the process of writing a dark book like that. Like, Holly Black, where are you mentally when that's happening?
I know.
Right? Because I'm even finding, and I don't know if this is with you as well, if you're writing like a very moving scene or a very sexy scene or a very heartbreaking scene or betrayal or things like that. Like, I kind of go to a dark place when I'm writing about dark things. So I'm like, I don't know if I like it though. Like, cause I'm generally a sunny person. Right. And I am finding, so my next book is, my main character, his wife dies like immediately it's not a surprise. It's in the blurb. in the
Mhm.
prologue part, you realize this. And then he has to carry this grief throughout the whole book. And I'm
That's
finding
heavy.
this book a lot harder to write. Not just because like my first book was very like, oh, she's a captive and she's still spunky and she won't let him get her down
Right.
kind of a thing. And they, you know, and then there's
You're having to
chemistry
get
there.
into your emotions a little bit
Yeah.
more with this
Yes.
one instead of like you're fighting, like
Yeah. It's like
angstiness.
fighting and flirting and
Mhm.
this one I have found it more difficult. And I thought, well, Cayley, why did you take on this heavy material? But it has to happen for there's connections in the third. So that's what I'm finding with the second book. It's very like I need to make sure everything from the first book connects and bridges over to the third book now for
Right.
the series to make it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you know, there are the little tidbits that you sprinkle in that I'm hoping that can all round out in the end.
Yep. I know.
But it
That's
is
the
like you do have to transport yourself to like a darker emotive state when you're writing these things or editing these things.
And that's why, so for me, there's sometimes like I'm very good at just like when I'm on a roll, I call them writer's high. When I'm
Mm-hmm.
like in that state, then nothing can really stop me.
Mm-hmm.
But usually what does stop me is an emotional scene. I'm not very good at
Uh,
being emotional and I'm not very good at expressing the emotions.
mm-hmm.
And so for me, when it comes to a very like I got to get into this character is emotional or this would
Yeah.
be gut wrenching. There are times where I won't write for weeks because I just have to be in that mind. I have to
Mm-hmm.
get myself there. Now when it comes to like sexy scenes or happy scenes or battle scenes, totally fine. Those
Oh, okay.
will bring on writer high and I can just roll from there kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Or like angsty. My two male characters in my romantasy, super angsty people. They've been together for forever and they've got so much history, but then
Mm-hmm.
this big destiny comes up and makes them very and one's like that morally gray. He's like a battle king guy, but he
Mm-hmm.
still wants to do right by his people. Like that's a big thing. And then the other one is like this shadow wielder with he's always out for himself. No one
Fantastic.
besides. So they're always just like it's yeah. So that I find those scenes very fun between those two.
Mm-hmm.
And my girl comes in and she's like she's young compared to them who've
Mm-hmm.
ruled. She's like, I can't believe that you two children basically have been able to rule a
Ruled this area.
realm for decades or whatever.
Yeah.
It's funny. So I find that stuff really fun and
Mm-hmm.
makes the writing, but it's emotional stuff for me.
Mm-hmm.
That it takes me a while. I almost have to prep myself. That
Yeah.
kind of
And I think I would agree with that. As I really like you say, like writing the kind of the banter between them. Like when I now with the second one, there's like friendships that have been built that I'm like, oh, I
thing.
actually love writing when they're just being friends.
Yeah.
Like everyone's like, oh, you write romance. It's like, yeah, but like that's just one
There's more.
part. Like you have
Yeah.
to make an entire actual plot
A
and make
plot
it
and
work.
characters. It's not just,
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes there are just two people and that's your plot,
sure.
but not very often.
Yeah, yeah. Or just like the mechanics of like, well, how would a village run in the Middle Ages?
Yeah.
And do you like this? Like, there's only so many people involved, and so and people didn't travel far or long. No one had the money to. They were all peasantry. Like, you kind of
Right.
just knew the same people your entire life and ended up marrying one of them, or if you were lucky, got to another village and married one of them. So I play with that a little bit in terms of like new people coming in and out because you need new characters in a story as you go. But I do like kind of the friendship portion or the relationship portion, if there's a mother-in-law involved or a parent figure or even the
Right.
kids, because then it's like in my head too. I've read so many books where especially indie, I think Penelope Douglas does this, where you the kids then grow up and you write a whole series of books
Yeah.
on the
Mhm.
kids, right? Sophie Lark does the same thing. And
Have you
it's
ever,
handy. It's extra material.
it is, well,
Yeah.
because like you said, so JLA, I feel like we bring her up on the podcast
Yes.
a lot, but that's just because she is so good at the having a main set of characters
Mm-hmm.
and then pulling whether it was people from the past that are
Mm-hmm.
just brought up or characters who came in later on, or like that kind of stuff, or even like, so one of my favorite series is the Wet Hot Kiss of hers. And that is like, you're talking gargoyles, demons, angels, like all that kind of a thing. And so there's almost like a love triangle thing going on throughout those books, but then the one person is obviously the one, like everyone would choose that person. I'm not gonna But then she gives the character who didn't get picked a totally different plot line where there's the main character is actually like, he's the love interest in this one, and then the main character is a girl, and so she's very good at doing that. She's very good at doing that. My dog.
Yeah.
She's a hound. I was gonna put her away. But
that's fine.
So she's very loud. But
well, that's great. And I think it's interesting. And I think I'm finding that a little bit, like I had a bad guy in my book, and like I didn't realize that everybody hated Oswald so much in my initial book. Like that was a lot of the feedback was like, I just wish that guy would have died. I got one review that was like, they were like, this would have been a 5-star, but I put it as a 4 because Oswald didn't die. And I was like, oh, like, but then that made me feel great because I was like, well, that means I wrote a good character. Like, so that's good. So that was a positive for me. But now, even then, now in this book, I'm like, oh, well, there are portions where I'm allowing him to show a little bit more of his reasoning.
Yeah.
But is he good or is he not? Like so there is a little bit of play there, which I think some authors pull it off so well. So I'm like, fingers crossed for me, but we'll see. And
excited because I'm just excited for your female. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank now. It's not Emily, is it? Or Emma. Yeah. I am super excited for her story. I loved her. Thank you. I really loved her. I think she was like a very much the epitome of what I would think of a Saxon woman in a way, you know? So I think I liked that character of her and stuff. And like you said, each one of your people are different, and like Yrsa obviously is Viking strong, you know, Viking hardcore. Maiden, or what do they call him? Not Maiden.
Shield Maiden.
Shield Maiden, yes. Yeah. Like that kind of a thing. But then you've got Emma, who is very strong in her kind of Saxon raised way, you know?
Yes.
So I'm very excited because don't get me wrong, I love a badass character. I really, really do.
Yeah.
I love a wholesome character who then also can show strength in that way too.
Yes. You know? Yeah. And I think I'm hoping that folks will like Emma in this version, because that was most of my feedback I got was people hate Oswald and everyone loved Emma. And I was like, it's funny. Emma was a kind of a crutch character for me when I first wrote her. Like she was like, I was like, okay, I need a little bit of tension between Ridley and Yrsa. And I also need somehow to bring everything back around as to how Yrsa gets out of where she was imprisoned a little bit. And so initially I wrote Emma as very sweet and soft. And so this book is a very good, I'm hoping it's going to be a good representation of even now how hard women have it. Just in turn, and I don't set out to write like, oh, the women's plight or anything, but it is like, it's very real. In those days, they had so much threat of, dying in birth. But doing everything.
To make things relatable too, because even because someone could find that her story or something that she's been, or how she's handling something, that's how to make someone relatable and be like, oh, yeah. So you definitely need all aspects of characters, and you do kind of need that kind of there's different aspects of gosh, why can't I think of the words right now? Like feminism and stuff, you know? That kind of thing.
For sure.
There's all different ways. And so you've got to kind of write, especially like how you're doing it, different females for each character, different relationships for each character. So you're doing very well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I am enjoying even just Emma as a whole character now. Like she gets to be her own person. And she's a lot more nuanced. And so it is exciting to put yourself in just a totally different mindset of even just the two female characters. And then the third female character, she's different again. Like, you know, everybody's different. So it is very cool to be able to jump into different personalities and still and really try to stay true to those personalities, I find, without myself infiltrating or another character infiltrating, because that is what I find is tricky. It's like I switch perspectives, not every chapter, but almost each chapter. Right. But I also don't write like Ridley's and then at the beginning of the chapter, and I don't write Yrsa. I don't know if that's a good choice or bad, but I'm hoping that I write it enough. Right. Yeah. Like I hope I write it well enough that, you know, within the first paragraph, you're like, oh, this is Emma's perspective. Oh, this is Ridley's perspective, kind of. So yeah, it's
because that's how I'm always a multi-point of view person. I think with my spastic mind, I can't just write one person. I have to have it. So my one, the steampunk one is much more, that one is just strictly each chapter is one point of view. And it might, it doesn't necessarily go back and forth. It can be, my female's name is Prima. So it could be her for 2 chapters or 3 chapters and then go to the other person. It's just when I'm kind of writing it as a more like an intense kind of plus it's a lot more like sexual and like that stuff. So it's whoever's perspective would make this the most interesting at the time. But then I also have the villain come in once in a while. So it goes back and forth from
that's cool.
And then I bring in the bad guy. Yeah. And he's only going to have maybe 3 chapters the entire time. But I am enjoying that. And then when it's the romantasy one, it's broken down by, I mean, it could even just be a paragraph is in one person's point of view and the rest is someone else's. It's just, I think that brings on the angst a little bit more. Yeah. It's good to counteract that way. So have you found that difficult or easy to write the multi?
I think easy for me, just because that's how I set out to do it initially. Like I thought, okay, yeah, it's dual POV. And I didn't really think of it. I think it is easier in that you can have a bit more description also when it's third person. So, you know, so-and-so is doing something and they're describing kind of the setting and everything, not entirely from that person's point of view. Whereas when it's first person, I actually really love reading third person. I just don't know that I could pull it off writing it as well in terms of giving a good breadth of setting, surroundings, like, you know.
I agree. I'm not very good with
feel between people. Yeah. Like, and it's all presumption.
I find it almost like it puts barriers on my writing, I guess, because I am such a descriptive writer. And so I feel like the first person kind of makes me just be like, think with just like one eyes instead of the whole, like the all surroundings.
Yeah. But then some people do it so well. And then I think like, oh, this was all just from the main character, who's usually a woman. If I'm, you know, fantasy or whichever, usually whatever I'm picking up, it's usually a woman. And so, but what I really love too is when the first person is unreliable. And so Taryn Fisher is like, I don't know if you've heard of her. She's Colleen Hoover's like friend, but she has her own huge career, and she has a very like unreliable narrator in all of her books, where you think like, is this person for real? Yeah. Like, is she telling? So you're getting it like, oh, well, this is how it's all happening. So initially you think, okay, great, this is the story, la 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 la, and then things start not adding up, and you think like, oh wait, am I being lied to?
Yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. That's a very unique way of writing. I like that. So do you want to talk about book 2? Do you want to talk maybe?
Sure. Like, in what sense? What it's about, or just do you want to just talk about writing it?
So
Or
I was like, do you have a release date in
oh,
mind? We've already kind of covered a bit of the characters.
yes.
And
So
then yeah.
okay, I'll give a bit of a summary. So it's a marriage of convenience. So Branton was a character in my first book. His wife, like I said, she passes away. He goes through this deep period of depression, and so he has also 4 kids. And so he's just kind of falling apart at the seams and needs help. And then Emma is a widow, and she's lovely, and she has her own daughter. But incidentally, in the medieval times, if you were a widow, you had to pay a tax to remain unmarried. Of course, right? Like, I looked this up and I was like, this is bananas. You can't just let a widow live in comfort by herself, which is already so
Right.
hard when you
It's
don't
pretty
have a
hard.
man in the medieval times. No, it was a real thing. So if you paid enough, you could remain unmarried. So she was doing that in the first book.
Yeah.
Like, and so now she wants to save a dowry for her daughter. So she is agreed to marry Branton. She was friends with the family anyway.
Yeah.
So they are getting married, and then shenanigans ensue. And so I have a rough date in mind. I'm thinking around November for release, which feels initially I was thinking September, but
Mhm.
I have 3 boys
Right.
and a
And
business that I run. So,
yeah.
yeah, my husband and I run a small business out of our home. And so it's just with real work and even just vacation time in the summer. My kids are going to be home with me. They don't go to daycare in the summer because I'm home, and they're kind of old enough to like fend for snacks and things themselves.
Yeah.
So I think September would have been too close to push it. So I am going to tentatively say November as a release.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. And then that way I can get enough kind of media build up too. I'm hoping to have it honestly all done by probably October, and then have a good month worth of like doing the marketing thing.
Just marketing and throwing things.
Yes.
Yeah. All the heavy work. Yeah. The fun
Yeah.
summer now. It's even though marketing sometimes, I know marketing gets kind of a bad rep, but sometimes it can be fun depending on
Yes.
what you're doing and stuff. I haven't, I guess we'll see once I finally get to the point where I'm like, here's my book. Actually buy my book.
Please buy it. Yeah. Yeah. So which one? Okay, because you're the lady of all the books. Like I am astounded when you post. I'm like, she's so busy. Like, how are you doing everything?
I've
Because you
just
have something on Vela, right?
I
Your
do. I
War of
have
Hearts and
2
Shadows.
stories that I post weekly about on
Okay.
that one. But the thing is, the one story was already drafted. The romantasy was drafted.
Okay.
But when I reread, when I was going through my first initial, so that was my nano. It was actually a project that I worked on just randomly. I'm not sure. I now it's been so long. So Bay has actually my main female character.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually been with me through a different story. But then I
Oh.
wrote this first chapter with this king who almost comes like he's just this guy who's been through war forever, and he's like scarred and like stuff, but he like owns these scars, and he almost,
Fantastic.
I always say he comes off, and I did it intentionally, he comes off kind of gross in the first wave, how he like loves her because he hasn't like had a feeling, like he hasn't felt anything
Oh.
but like running a kingdom and like all that stuff
Mm-hmm.
in war forever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the first couple chapters are, I always say, are rough for the king because I feel like he gets written off. But I don't know. I don't remember if it was a dream or what. But those 2 chapters just came. I pulled Bay from a story she was already in, and I just felt
Okay.
like she wasn't working,
Mm-hmm.
and threw her in there. And then it just rolled because then Brim
Oh,
came
nice.
along because I was like, I need like this other character, and then it turned into my nano project,
Mm-hmm.
and it just went from there, and it was great and I loved it, but it changed big time,
Mm-hmm.
because the middle was almost, I didn't want it to be, it was too much romance and too
Oh,
much almost
okay.
love triangle-ish,
Mm-hmm.
and I got away from the big, because there's darkness, it's a dark fantasy, so I got away from
Yeah.
like the demon aspect and the underground rising and like that kind of stuff.
Oh.
So then it made the middle kind of didn't it kind of like collapsed for how strong the ending was.
Okay.
So I'm rewriting the middle currently as I'm publishing Tavella.
Yeah.
Too.
And how do you like that experience though? Like, how do you like having it serially? I guess you had a draft, so that was helpful.
Yeah. So I kind of know where I'm going. I'm kind of just making it better, making it make more sense, and like it's becoming instead of like a storyline how Sarah J. Maas kind of does, where there's this one character who's in there, and then the love interest of that goes away, and then the big love interest, that was like the original plan. Well, now it's more of a why choose, and it fits in my my alpha readers are loving that. They're like,
oh, great.
Like so they're reading it as I'm writing it, and they were like, wait. Are you talking here? Like, are you saying this right now? Like, and I'm like, there's been some stuff. Like, just wait,
Yeah.
So that's been really fun because I think it brings the dynamic with the destiny and the what's going on together. So that one already was drafted.
Okay.
And so it was easy to just keep putting things up on Vella. I do love the serial way of writing. It's been fun to do. So yours to take is the steampunk, kind of a monster romance, but it's doesn't really have, I guess you could call it more like I could say paranormal romance, because it's more like mutant style beings, like where there's humans, but then there's like a group of people who are called the oddities, who maybe have gifts or have like red skin or like that kind of stuff, So like almost like X-Men style, you could say.
Yeah, sure.
But it's that one is fun because that one just gave me a chance it's given me a chance to play with the serial way of writing. So this one is very much, I just write something weekly. I go through the editing really fast and then put it up. Okay. So it's definitely expanding my writing, and my mind just never shuts off. So I'm always, always writing.
Always thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it seems like I'm always writing stuff, but I'm sure you've noticed I'll say like, hey, I'm going to really get back into this siren one or whatever. But then when I am getting into it, I'm like, this one needs so much work. I don't have the time. Yeah.
And is that the one that you're looking to publish into a book at the end? Like, or are you just sticking with the Vella and serial publishing for right now?
Well, I do want to publish them all in the end, but my main one is the Romantasy, which is going to be a series as well.
Okay.
So that is the one that I plan. And how Vella works, I've talked about it on the podcast before too, but how it works is after you post your very last ending chapter, you're done. You just have to wait 30 days, and then you can do whatever you want with it. Get it in paperback, hardback, put it up on Vella. It's all yours to do whatever you want. You can keep it up on, or do it on Unlimited, Kindle Unlimited.
Okay.
And then you can keep it up on Vella too, to still make money that way and stuff. So
and that's where, like, I live in Canada and we don't have access to Vella. And I'm because there are sometimes you want to break. Like, I agree that like I kind of just pick one project and focus all my eggs in one basket. And then, but sometimes I'm like, well, I do want to do like just a little serial, like small little chapter of like a random, contemporary romance or something, or a dark romance or whatever that
or like
I think,
short story.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think you could get kind of really good traction on Vella. And I've heard other authors say that like, from the reads they get from Vella, they can pretty much publish their book with what they've made. Yeah. And I'm just astounded. I'm up in Canada here. Like, what?
I am hoping
that would be so
I am hoping they do. So it's been around for like 2 years, I think now, but it's really just getting traction, I think, in the last few months, last year. And I'm hoping that means that then now that they're seeing that it is becoming a thing, it is becoming popular in America, I think they will further it into other countries and stuff. But I do know that there's other serial
Yes, there are.
sites and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
and everybody knows of Wattpad. It's kind of like that too.
Yeah.
A lot of people do that.
True.
Yeah. Because that's what I started writing on Wattpad when I first. But it wasn't really, I had fun with it. It was a great way to just get me kind of going. But it wasn't really my thing.
Yeah. I mean, I tried a little bit of Wattpad and I found it very reciprocal. Like, if you read my chapter, I'll read yours and then I'll like it. And that's fine, I think, if you have the time for it. But like you say, like moms, it's like, well, we just kind of work when you have a pocket of time. And in that pocket of time, even with social media lately, I'm finding I'm really not as inspired as I was last year, I would say. Like last year, I was very heavy into Bookstagram. Granted, I was really trying to like build a bit more of a following prior to my book release. But even this year, I'm kind of like, okay, well, I now have a book or something that I'm proud of. I'm not going to go so hard on all the medias. Just not that I don't like to interact with it. It's just that it takes so much time. So even for like a Wattpad thing where it's like, oh, well, I need to all of a sudden read all these different stories of all these different people just so that they like mine. Like that's not.
See, and that's something Kindle Vella says no about. They do not like, if they catch you doing something like that. So like Stacy and I, obviously we read each other's books.
For sure. Yeah.
But we don't try and be like, you read mine, I'll read. It's just whenever we pick it up, whenever I would be reading her book anyways. Yeah. And there are some groups where you can just kind of post your links and then say if you're wanting a romantasy read, you know, I just uploaded a new episode, but it's not like I'm going and then rereading their books and stuff. Yeah. It's more like it's another way to promote kind of.
Yes, which is great because that's very like organic then. And that's like friends. Like when I a lot of the Bookstagram friends that I've made, like of course I want to read your stuff. Like I naturally just want to read what people I know are putting out into the world. I think it's very cool to pick up someone's work and purchase it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I know this person.
I've always loved indie authors. Like when I first got into Bookstagram, it was very rare for people. I was always, like I said, I was promoting people, reading for people who were indie. I loved that. I've always found that very interesting. And I also have always felt like just because the publisher didn't choose them doesn't mean they're bad. They've got super fast-paced, great writing, you know? So now I am excited that just in the last year, I feel like it really exploded for indie authors.
Yeah, I agree.
I love seeing that. I do love seeing that. So I do want to get into, you kind of brought up a little bit about the mom life. So do you have like a schedule with your writing or editing, or is it just totally random?
You know, I really try. I'm a pretty much, I like to plan things as much as I can. I have 3 kids in 3 different sports right now. And in this spring, like, I don't know if you find this, but year end of school, our school's done at the end of June. I know a lot of people in the States, their school is done in May or mid-June. And the end of the year is just like every field trip, every parental volunteer thing, like every special day. Oh, you have to make cupcakes today? What? Like, so, and then add sports. So right now I would say, no, I don't have a great schedule. And I think that's where I'm kind of struggling a little bit in terms of like momentum. Just because there's a lot going on in my I don't want to say external life, in my life. And still have to work a regular job. So that's also, I'm very lucky to do that. And I actually like the work. So that's fine too. So I would say that I know I'm not an evening writer. By the end of the day, like 8:30, I'm so tired. I'm going to just read a book and go to bed. But if I can do it earlier in the day, like if I can get an hour or 2 in the morning, right after the kids like go on the bus or I drive my youngest to daycare some days. If I can like go for a walk, have a coffee, and like then write for the next like 2 hours, that's like my dream morning. Yes. Yeah. And then after that, I can get to like admin tasks and things like that. So I guess the best type of schedule I would say for myself is like a morning and a couple hours at a time. I've written for entire days at a time, and I like doing kind of those like block chunks, but I just don't think I'm that good at it because I get distracted. Because I will pick up my phone, because I will, I'm like, oh, oh, let's see.
Oh, I
let's
have
search
to
some
like
social
make sure the
media.
phone is away. Even though sometimes I do find it easy to write on my phone too. There's sometimes where I will do that because it's very quick and there's a scene I just want to get out of my head.
Yes.
So I'll go to Google Doc and I will just open up a chapter and
Nice.
go.
Yeah.
But then you have the distraction because even if it's or me, we'll sit down and I'll be like, I'm just gonna write on my phone today in the sun. And then all of a sudden I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh
yeah, I know. It's so hard. And I find that like we're the first generation to have to deal with this. Like our parents didn't have this dopamine hit every time they pick up because they just didn't have it. And our kids, I find it very hard because I'm trying to find a balance between, okay, kids, like you are gonna have this in your life, but also try not to like move. My one son just like, if there's a screen, he is like zoned out completely onto it. And I'm like, this is a little kid's show. You don't even care about this. Like, why are you watching? You know, but when we grew up, in hindsight, like the TV was always on in our house, but it was not kids stuff. It was like Oprah or the news.
It was whatever was on.
Yeah, whatever was on. Yeah. So it's, you know, each generation's quite a bit different. And so, but I agree. If my phone's around and I'm even just doing some work stuff, then I'm like, oh, I'll just open, you know, Instagram and take a look.
Well, mine's even always on. I mean, mine has been on vibrate or silent for like a decade. You know, like it's never on ringer. But I know what that sounds. So even if it's like in the room with me and I hear that little like noise or whatever, you know, I'm like, oh, should I go check? What is it?
I know I've silenced all notifications for any social media, any email. I think the only ones I get are text and Snapchat because it's usually just my girlfriends. We Snapchat each other throughout the day and hype each other up. But that's kind of it. Like I needed to turn off my notifications. Otherwise I would have like always been on.
I know it is. It's so distracting.
Yeah. It's tricky too, because even our, so for our business, I have an accounting software where you need an authenticator to log in. So you need your phone to get, even if I'm like, oh, I'm going to just do work on admin stuff today and set it aside. Then I think, oh, I have to go get my phone now because I need to log in with the authenticator app. So, which then, I mean, I should then put it away, but
it is, it is difficult. And, but it is difficult. Like summer is, so you'll kind of always know too, summer's busy for you guys. So probably don't start a brand new book. In the summertime.
So this worked out actually really good last year. I had beta readers read His Viking Captive in July last year. And so that was like, oh, hands off. I'm not looking at it. I'm not even going to think about it as much as I can, you know, having other people judge your work. And so I didn't get feedback on it. I'd say probably a 3-week period. And so that worked really good. And I was hoping to do that this year. I just don't think I'll have the time. So maybe August will when I'll get that feedback. Maybe, I mean, if I get right on top of it in these next 2 weeks, maybe sooner, but that kind of let the pressure go. So that was a bit of a load off in that, oh yeah, no, you're not looking at your manuscript right now because it's with other people. And then you're going to do a bunch of stuff to it. So that was handy. But yeah, I generally don't plan to do a whole bunch in the summer because it's just, you know, kind of maintain status quo. So
let's try and spend as much time. Cause like for me, I'm always home as well. I run daycare like beside. So I'm always home. That's like my job. I'm always around children. And so summertime is very busy for me as well. But my kids are at a pretty good age. And this year we chose not to do baseball and stuff. So we aren't really in the sports, but we're an outdoorsy kind of a family. So we're always trying to get outside, do something. I'm trying to do activities. We go to the pool once a week at least and stuff. So I'm very busy. But one thing that I have found in the last year for me, I had to, even with the daycare kids, like there is a quiet time. They all kind of relax and stuff, whether they nap or they just relax. And I let them know like, this is, if you need me, obviously go to the bathroom. Like, if you need a drink, let me know. If whatever, I'm here. I'm still here. I'm still available. But I let them know I'm going to be sitting in the kitchen and I'll be right.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah, you have to. And I mean, I shouldn't say I didn't work on anything last July either when my stuff was at Beta Readers. Like, and I'm sure you get this as a writer too. I can't not write things.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it makes me unhappy. I'm not my best self when I am not thinking of a new story or building on a plot line or something. So, I mean, I would say I wasn't like tampering with my manuscript when that was happening.
Right.
But yeah, I'm still like,
you
if I'm on
you
vacation,
weren't like diving deep into anything, but you were still working on stuff and doing things.
So that really resonates. Like, your quiet time. Absolutely. Like, everybody needs some chill time by themselves. My kids are a little bit older now. Like, they're all in school, which is just like so lovely. Just in terms of like how much they need you. Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. I want to have a great summer with them. I want to go enjoy, like, you're right, doing a lot of outdoorsy things. Up in Canada, we don't have a long season of nice hot weather. So you do as much as you can. And I want to enjoy that, and I want to prioritize that they're still young only for so long, right? So my little guy is going to be going into grade 1 next year, which means full-time school. And right now he's in just a couple days a week, the way they work the kindergarten. It's like a full day, but only a few days a week. And even that, I'm like, oh, he's going to be gone. Oh, like, so that opens up a whole new world for me productivity wise. That's fantastic.
So we talked about the mother trying to figure out schedule and stuff. Are you more of a pantser or are you more of a plotter?
Initially, I would say a pantser. His Viking Captives was for sure. I had a rough outline, and then I kind of pantsed it. Now I'm finding I have to be a plotter, only because I have, like I said, connections from like the first, second, and third books that all need to go together. Yeah. So I have like the beats, I guess, of when the midpoint should be. And so I've also read a little bit more about like the Save the Cat, and Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. Like, they are very helpful books, and so they've kind of helped me structure things. But then in a scene, I just let it flow. Like, you know, the characters are going to talk for me.
They are. And that's the thing. I truly believe, and I feel like it's such an author thing, because there's a lot of people, like even like my husband, as much as he hears me talk about my writing every day, when I start going on about the character, it was like they were telling me, like, this scene needs to be fixed because I would not say these things. This is not what would flow out of my mouth, you know?
Yeah. And I do find that's super handy with edits. So I actually really enjoy edits. I know a lot of people don't like editing. I almost don't like drafting as much, because it's like pressure to just get words out. Yeah. And then, so, because I have usually like a word count in my head, and I know that all this has to happen, but I don't exactly know exactly how it's going to happen yet. So then in edits, I can go back and think like, oh, actually, this doesn't work at all. This character would say this at this point in their journey. They are here. So
I do agree. It is fun. Drafting can be daunting in the sense of, I mean, everything is blank. You're always opening up to more blankness. You've got to fill that in, you know?
But I can see why some people love drafting, and they love the thought of a blank page. And I think I'm the opposite of that. I like to kind of critique and make a little bit of a nicer sentence rather than like make an entire plot point move. So.
Well, and like that's where you really go in and you thicken your character too. You know? You make them more of a person than just like a shell and stuff, because you're like, I laid out what's happening to you. But now I want to dive in deeper in stuff, into descriptions, into feelings, into all that. So that's why editing, I agree.
How do you find it though? Like you said, you've done serial stuff. So do you have an overarching plot for all that? Or are you kind of winging it as you go because of how the feel of the characters are taking you?
So when it comes to certain books, so I only have 2/3 on Vella right now. So the third one though is more of it's something I've kind of started before, so I'm not really diving too deep into that one. But
Okay.
for me, it's like I have a process of how I know. So I write the chapter and then I just go through myself, reread it and edit it. And then I put it through Pro Writing Aid and kind of see what they suggest, see what I'm missing, and Grammarly, do that kind of stuff. But then also when it comes to the romantasy one, I have the alpha readers. I do not have that for the steampunk one.
Oh, okay.
That one's not quite as much world building and magic and that stuff. It's more like steamy mafia style
Okay.
thing, you know. And talk about friendships. Now that one is very friendship core, where the romantasy is not. It's like the three of these people are together against all odds, kind of a thing, you know.
Yeah.
So they're very different dynamics. And then I'm doing like kind of an alien romance serial series kind of a thing too. And that's the one that's up on Vella. I finally wrote, but it's had one chapter for like a month. So that's how much I'm really investing in this one.
Yeah.
And so this is one that I wrote back in the fall. I almost went through this as a nano project kind of a thing.
Oh, okay.
So this one has some structure to it, but I kind of brought in a new twist in where it was going to just be a single book. And where this one now is a series of where it's like an agency who takes people from all over the universe and finds their match. Kind of a thing.
Oh, cool.
And so each book
is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that one's more fun. And I am definitely a pantser through everything. As much as I love to world build, plot, make maps, do all that stuff, I am a pantser. I will always be. Otherwise, I start to be like, this is boring now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I can. Yeah, it is. I think you intuitively, like if you know Becca Syme on Instagram, she's so famous and she does the intuitive writer thing. And so I think honestly, our brains as writers and people are smart enough to, if you start something here, you're going to end up here, whether you're a plotter or a pantser, you intuitively know you need to swing your character back this other way or add these plot points, or then it's like a happy accident to you, but I think that your brain is already processing that in the background.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. Because sometimes, and obviously some people really do need that structure, and I love to set goals and I love to do other like scheduled things, you know, have a certain, like I said, schedule out my time for writing. I try so hard, and like sprints. I love to do writing.
Okay.
I find that very much easier, but I have tried the storyboard aspect and stuff, and I was like that type of person that was like, now it's too hard to write because I'm trying to just write whatever I just laid out.
Fill in the Yeah. I actually did a big, like took out one of my kids' big rolls of paper. And after my draft for this second book, His Saxon Wife, after that draft was done, then I wrote down all the main plot points per chapter. And then I was like, okay, here's a wide level view of it. And then I could move things around to just make more sense. So I found that was easier for plotting, for editing afterwards. So I had a general idea of what was going to happen as I drafted, hit the main plot points there. But then I did find that bigger bird's eye view was handy. And now I'm kind of going with that for edits.
Okay.
It's okay. Yeah. So far. Yeah.
Right. And that is a good way. So like with me, I'm a very notebook person, old style still. I have notes on my phone and everything, but whenever a new story idea comes to me where it really hits me, like I can't get it out of my head. I make character boards on Pinterest. I do that. Okay.
Yeah.
And it could simply be who I want them to look like, or more vibes too.
Sure.
So for my one, like this, the guy with the shadow, he's got red eyes. So I'll find like there's Sith Lord people and stuff, just because it gives me that vibe of of him. And then I do try to stick to a magic system as well. I don't need I feel like even my magic system builds as I go and expands.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I need the set, like if there's different, say, if you're talking goblins and fairies and vampires.
Oh, yeah. You need some rules.
System when they have like what yeah. So I do that. I'm a world builder plotter, I guess, in that aspect, but I am not a story plotter, if that makes sense.
Okay. That makes sense though. Because you would need some like ground rules of the world. Like how are you operating in this setting?
Yeah. And like I do a lot of like where there's so realms and or kingdoms and stuff. And so I used to just sketch maps out myself. I am not an artist, so it was very awful. Some of my old books, I like to look at them and be like, oh my goodness, like did my second grader draw this? But now I found Incarnate, which is great. I found that back in like 2020.
Yes, actually, I think you told me about that. And I wanted to get that name from you again because I didn't write it down. There, just wrote it down. Because I think for my second book, I am expanding territory a little bit more in it, and therefore I need some type of map. And so it's fine for me to describe it, but people love a map. Like
they do, and it's easy for you too, because say you are starting to build into new towns and stuff, you could put the forest in there or some other barrier that's between them. You can put roads in there. And what's cool is Incarnate also does where you can make a giant world map. You can do it on parchment. You can put it in just like a pretty map. Like that's what I've done where it's like color and stuff like that. But I'm working on parchment now, so that's new territory.
Oh, okay.
You can also do just towns. So like that they call them like battle maps. So it's very district towns, and then they give stuff to work with. So it's pretty easy.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think that's what I need for the second one. I think it's kind of one of those little. I love a map in a book. So and I reference a map in a book too if it's there. Like if someone says, "Oh, this town," it's like, "Oh, okay, well I'll look where that is," so that it helps me picture where things are as a reader. So I definitely think I'm going to go forward with doing more of that kind of cool stuff. And I know for indie it's kind of it's very popular to do even just different shading on chapter headings on pages. And like there are very cool things with indie publishing that I don't see as much in traditional publishing. And I think it's just because people are playing to the market of what your readers want, and they give the readers what they want, and it's great.
Pretty books have become such a thing. They were always kind of around, but really boomed the last couple of years with the sprayed images, and that's pretty character. Like Holly Black does do a really or editor, whoever does it, what she says, I want that or what. She does a really good header kind of a thing with her chapters.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah. But that was something I was going to ask you as well. Formatting. Do you do your own formatting? Do you use a site?
Yes.
Do you like to?
I work on a Mac, so I got Vellum. And that gives you like there's certain just I guess presets in there, and I picked one that looked kind of more medieval than not. And I really liked it because it was so easy. And so I knew this would be a long-term thing for me. Once I published my first book, I wasn't going to stop there. So I then purchased that. It's like a one-time purchase. So it is a few $100s. And but then I can kind of, and it is pretty intuitive. Like you just upload your manuscript and it has it all for you. And then you review it and proof it, and you can change things within it. I haven't tried putting in any artistic overlays like a map or anything like that. So I don't know how that will work yet. But no, so I don't pay a formatter yet. I don't, never say never. But right now I thought, well, this is good just for standard, like get it all done. I had seen other indie authors have this as well. Sorry?
Right. No, sorry. I couldn't. But that's the part to me that seems overwhelming. I feel like I would get, as much as I love to be creative and do stuff on computers and stuff, I feel like that process, since it's so brand new to me, is very overwhelming to think about.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not a great computer person either. I'm like decently okay. I could figure out some stuff, but I don't love that portion of it. And so again, I paid for like expediting the problem of like, okay, what is the easiest way for me to get point A to point B and not have to pay someone? Because it's still, you're indie authors, you're paying for every little thing that you're doing. And it's not that cheap, but you're believing in your work and the product that you're making. So I definitely did like that software, the Vellum software, but I know that's not for everyone. I've seen other people like actually going into HTML code and like reformatting all their lines and things. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what scares me.
Yeah.
Like I'd rather pay someone than do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is that Stacy uses, but I know she's had a couple of moments where she thought she was all done with the formatting and she's missing all the chapter kind of a thing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the tricky thing about like, that's why Amazon always tells you to check your proof, like every page, right? Because it's still, there could be something missing, a whole page missing or whatever. And I don't know that, I mean, I publish with Amazon right now, but I don't know that their quality is always amazing either, because I had a friend who got the book. I'm just going to show you a copy. And it was like cut off, like up to here. And I thought, and I got it and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, this has nothing to do with me. I cannot fix this book, but it shouldn't be like this. Right. And he was just like, oh, I didn't even notice. I'm like, oh, well, no, it should have like a border around it. I was appalled.
That's like your baby. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, I'm like, well, you should, I don't know, even contact Amazon for a refund at an exchange. Like, I don't know. He did not care. But
no, I've gotten a couple, actually, some of my early on Katie Roberts ones. Yeah. From like the Wicked Villains, they're they're almost crooked. Like you still get all the words and everything, but they're like
a little bit formatted weird. I'm actually just going to, unfortunately, my phone's gonna die. So I'm gonna have to just plug you in and then turn the volume up, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, no, and honestly, I think my only last question was, was the writer's block. So do you fall into that funk a lot, or does it not get to you? And what do you do to kind of get out of it?
That's a great question. I think I am one of those people that, yes, of course I get it. I think everybody gets some type of writer's block. Like you say, like if you're building up to an emotional scene and you don't want to do it or whatever. I found I've been a bit blocky on this second book, honestly. And this is more in my head than anything else, is that the first book got really good reviews and it did really well. And I don't mean to brag, but it got like #1 on Amazon several times in my country. So in Canada, not in America. But it was quite high up there. I got a lot of really good feedback. And now in my head, I was like, oh my gosh. Like,
is it going to be good enough? Is it going to live up to that? Yeah. Well, if Stacy was here, you guys would have a lot to talk about in that sense, because that's why she's not here. Because her dark side did so well. It was like, she's written like 6 books. Yeah. But that one just blew up and did really well. And people... now she's like, and it's like mafia style. So she's like, she was getting very almost burnt out and overwhelmed. Is it going to be good enough? Can she tie all these pieces together?
Yeah. So similar. So I had a little bit of that with the second book. And I would say that the best thing for me to do is just work through it. Like I'm not a huge, do everything at once person. Like I can if I need to. If I like for edits on this book, I definitely like went to a hotel, finished like the final proofread with no distractions for like a weekend and just powered through. Or like final before I sent it off to beta readers, did like a final weekend where I just powered through. I don't love doing that. I like being a bit more consistent and doing a little bit every day. And I think that helps me not get the block, because then when as soon as I don't work on something for a while, it's really easy to put it off and then just put it off again.
Yes. Yeah. That's where I fall into blocks. The most time that I fall into blocks is if I go on vacation. So I kind of have to write every day to continue. Otherwise, my brain will start being like, do we really want to sit down?
Yeah.
And then I'll cause myself a block because of that, because then I've lost the feeling that writer's high, that feeling of where my characters wanted me to go and stuff. So
you're almost like out of flow, I would say, because like even like when we have some family that's farther away and then they come stay with us, and that like people staying in my space is hard just in general because I'm an introvert, but also like even my kids when they're getting to an age where they want to have friends over more, and theoretically I should be able to just let them go play, and they play all day and they don't need me or bother me at all. But I just like when there's people in the house, I'm like,
you're still
I'll
like
read a book. Like I can't, I can't get into the flow of it because there's possible interruptions. So I think that just like probably consistency and then like time alone is the best way for me to avoid writer's block. So I would agree with your vacation standpoint as well. Like
no, and that's smart. I mean, there's nothing I have a couple of groups that I kind of have other writers in there and we help each other out. And there's a couple people who I don't know who wants to come to me for advice, like, but they'll be like, how do you keep writing? And I'm like, I don't know how to put more into words of you have to find the time. You have to make writing your priority, that kind of thing. Even through everything else that is prioritized in your life. If you really want it, you just have to. Otherwise, you will cause blocks. You'll procrastinate. You won't find the time, because I did that for years. So, and that's why I'm just now I've been writing for forever.
Yes.
I'm just now getting to actually publishing stuff.
Yes. And I think there's a component of like, you need to take yourself seriously enough. Like there's a lot of people that want to write a book, or I got that a lot after, because I built up my Instagram audience a little bit, made some friends on Bookstagram. I write under a pseudonym. So then at New Year's, I kind of had let enough friends know that I was like, oh, it's going to get out in my real life too. So then just let everyone know via an Instagram post on like my normal, with all my friends and family and stuff. And everyone was so shocked and surprised. So I did like doing it that way, because then I was already like, oh, here's my finished product. Like, it's already like, boom, it's done. So I can't back out of it and I can't run away from it. And here it is. And I'm actually proud of this project. So here it is. So that worked really well. But I would say that like, I wasn't ready to tell people about it up until that point that it was almost done. And then so a lot of people after were like, oh, well, you always get the comments of like, oh, I wish I could write a book, or I wish I had the time. I'm like, I make time. I don't have the time. I also don't watch TV and don't, like often, right? Like everyone watches TV, but like, I don't often, do other things where if you're out for dinner every single Friday night with your friends, I'm probably in my house writing. Like, exactly. So there is like a bit of a prioritization. Now, I'm not saying either time is better or worse, however you spend it. It's just enough this year got my shit together that was like, oh, I'm going to make something.
No, but it is true. And probably even more so. I mean, I guess I can't speak for plotters or anyone else's, but for me, being the pantser, because of the fact that like when an idea comes to me, I can hold on to it until I get to that point where it's my section of day to write. Yeah. But if I don't get it out that day, then I might lose it, Yeah. So I definitely had to get to the point of prioritizing. Is so important, and it was very, very necessary. And I wish I would have done it, because I went all summer last year where I did not write at all, and I lost all those months. I lost,
Yeah. And do you find that you get down when you don't write though? Like,
oh, for sure. I do. I get into like a little funk, and even like the husband will notice and stuff. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I just can't write. I haven't written in a long time, and I'm really down."
Yeah. I definitely get moodier. I don't know if it's like a cathartic outlet or something. I definitely feel like I'm like, oh, I can tell I haven't written for a week. Like,
if you had anything else to input, go on.
Just thank you so much. This was totally fun. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me.
Well, and thank you for coming on, because obviously without guests, it would just be me talking and nobody wants to hear that. So, yeah, so I appreciate you. This was fun, and it's a good way to get to know, because like I've said before on the podcast, I talk to people. I'm a very talkative person. I love getting to know people on Bookstagram, but it's way different when you get to connect like this and you dive deeper into brains.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, thank you. And